Kesubos Daf begins with a Mishnah and takes us to the end of the 10th parak of the Masechta, parak Misha Hayinasai. So let's begin with the Mishnah, which has one case, which is an interesting situation. It comes up with an interesting halacha. You have one man who's married to two women, one before the other, and therefore the earlier one has priority as far as collecting his property for Ksuba, and then he took the only land that he has and he sold it to a purchaser, to a lekeach. Now, what happens is the women have the right to collect ksuba and they have the right to take the land away from the purchaser because it's meshubah to them. Here, the first wife, the one who has priority, told the lokeach she's not going to take it away from him. She said, she said, I promise I'm not going to take anything away from you. I have no rights. I'm relinquishing my rights to take the property away from you. Now, that was only the first wife who did that. However, the second wife, she does have a right to now come and say, well, I want to collect it. And since it wasn't collected by the first wife, it's available for the second wife. So she can come and she can take the property away from the buyer. Now, then what happens is that the first wife can take the property away from the second wife because the first wife has priority over the first wife, and she didn't say, I'm not going to touch this property. She just said, I'm not going to take anything away from the buyer. Once the second wife has it, she can go to the second wife and say, what right do you have to have it? I have priority over you, so I take it away from you. So then she'll go and take it away. Now, once the first wife has it, now the buyer can come and take it away from the first wife because the buyer says, you have no right to take this property. You promised me you're not going to take anything away from me, and this property came from me. So in this situation, then, you're back to square one. Now, the second wife can take it away from the buyer again, and it's going to go around in circles. And that's what the Mishnah says. The halacha is that it goes around and around in circles. They can keep passing the land from hand to hand, and obviously they're not going to do that. The only way out of this is that they sit down together, the three of them, and they come to some kind of agreement. And that's what they have to do. Says the Mishnah, cryptic line, the same thing applies for a Baal Chov, somebody who's owed money, and the same thing applies for a woman who's a Baal Chov. The Gemara will explain what those lines mean. Okay, let's begin the Gemara. So the Gemara says, first of all, what does it help that she writes Dinu Dvarim Ainli Alacha? What does she says, I'm not going to compete with you over your land. There's two reasons why that shouldn't be effective. First of all, how do you transfer any possession? You didn't transfer property. You just said, or even if you wrote, I'm not going to have anything to do with you, that doesn't have any effect in halacha. We even have a brisa where it says that somebody says to his friend, I don't have any complaints against you on this field, and I have no dinu dvarim, I have no asik, I have no business in it, my hands are pulled away from it, all these things are meaningless because they don't change his rights in it at all. You cannot just cancel your rights in something by saying so. So says the Gemara, we're talking about a situation where she didn't just say it, but she actually did a kinyan. She was makna any rights that she had to the purchaser. She did a kinyan, and we learned in Parak Kesubos that works. So now the Gemara says second question, and that's how can you make her give up her rights just because she said she's giving them up? There's always a situation in which a woman gives up her rights to her buyer, to the buyer from the husband, where she can say, I didn't really mean it. I just wanted my husband. I just wanted to please my husband. I knew that my husband wants the sale to go through, and I'm standing in the way. I wanted to please him, and therefore I said I'm allowing the sale to go through. That's a concept which we learned. The Gemara quotes a mission that says that if somebody buys property from a man, and this property had been set aside to pay off his wife's ksuba, so then the purchaser goes and buys the right from the woman. He buys from her right to take it away from him. So therefore, it looks like he bought everything. He covered all the bases. He bought it from the husband. He bought it from the wife. Still, the sale is meaningless, and it's canceled because the wife can come and take it away from him. How so? She could say that I sold my rights to you was just because I wanted to please my husband, and really I did not seriously mean it, and we believe that, and it doesn't count at all. So therefore, the Gemara's question is, how come over here it works when she says to the purchaser, I'm giving you my rights? So the Gemara answers this concept is a machlokes. It's a machlokes between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda if the woman could say, I was just trying to please my husband or not. Now the Gemara quotes a brisa which shows us this machlokes. The case of the brisa is where a man had two pieces of land. He sold each one to a separate purchaser. The first one that he sold, the wife did not sign that she is giving him her rights to collect a ksuba from it. The second one she signed and said she's giving him her rights to collect the ksuba from it. So the first piece of land, the second piece of land she can't collect from, because the second piece of land, that is the first piece of land, she certainly can't collect from, Because the one who bought the first piece of land will say, when I bought it, there was still property left over. And the rule is, as long as I left something behind, you got to go to him first. You have to go to the most recently sold property first. So you can't collect from me because when I bought it, there was still more property left. So she could go to the second purchaser and try to collect from him. But she signed that she's not going to do so. She signed her rights over. So here you have a mahlokas between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Meir says she signed her rights away. She can't collect. Rabbi Yehuda says she could say, I was just trying to please my husband. So therefore, Rebbe, by us, who wrote our Mishnah, is obviously going like Rabbi Meir, and he's saying that there's no claim of I was just trying to please my husband. It's a machlokes tanaim, and this Mishnah holds that this Mishnah is in accordance with Rabbi Meir's opinion, and holding I just trying to please in accordance with Rabbi Meir's opinion that she can't say I'm just trying to please my husband. So the Gemara's question is, hold on a second. What's Pshat in Rabbi Yehuda Nasi wrote the Mishnayos? Here he wrote a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Meir, that the halacha is that she cannot say I'm just trying to please my husband, and the fact that she gave her away her rights sticks. However, Maseches Gittin, he wrote a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda. That was the brisa which we quoted earlier, that she could say Dinu Dvarim. And how come over there she wrote a Stam Mishnah like Rabbi Yehuda that she could say, she could write over her rights and she loses her rights, and she but she could still have a claim where she could say, I was just trying to please my husband. It's a contradiction in how Rebbe's writing the Stam Mishnayos. So the Gemara offers two answers to this contradiction. Answer number one is Rav Papa. Rav Papa says, in our case, there is no claim of the husband. A whole new answer. The husband is not she's divorced. She wrote over her rights to the first purchaser, or to the only purchaser in our case, when she didn't have a husband. So she couldn't have a claim, I was trying to please my husband. Therefore, Rebbe really holds that she generally, if she's married, she could say I was trying to please my husband. And that's why in the brisa we brought, she could say that. However, in our Mishnah, she can't because she doesn't have a husband. The Gemara's second approach is Rav Ashi. And Rav Ashi says, really, Rebbe paskins like Rebbe Meir across the board, that a woman generally cannot say, I'm just trying to please my husband. We had a brisa where he said she could. So that's as follows. There, even Rabbi Meir will agree that she could say that she's just trying to please her husband. And that is, Rabbi Meir agrees that generally a woman could say, I'm just trying to please my husband. Here, in our case, in the case where we brought the brisa, where Rabbi Meir says, where she signed it over to the second person, she can't get out of it by saying, I was just trying to please my husband. That's because over there's two different buyers, and she didn't write anything to the first buyer. If she was really concerned about pleasing her husband, she should have written over both she should have given up her rights on both sales. She didn't. Obviously, she's not just trying to please her husband. Therefore, that's how Rabbi Meir says that claim doesn't work. However, in the Gemara that we brought from Maseches Gittin, the brisa, which we brought where she is allowed to say I was just trying to please my husband, there even Rabbi Meir agrees there was only one purchaser and there was only one opportunity and she sold it, and she could say I was just trying to please my husband. The Gemara now has a halachic shaila, a question, and it tries to resolve from the brisa that we just brought from Maseches Gittin. So the question is as follows. We know that the halacha is that if somebody has land and he owes money, let's say he owes a ksuba, and he sells some of the land, you cannot come and take the land away from the purchaser unless there's no land left that the borrower or that the husband himself owns. You cannot take the land away from a purchaser as long as there's free land that is still owned and that's available. So the other question is, what if the guy bought the land, he's left land behind? So he knows his purchase is secure because he left land over. That was his understanding when he bought it. But then that piece of land that he left over gets ruined, gets flooded, something happens. Can the Baal Chov now go to the first buyer and say, I want to take your land away because this piece of land is ruined. I can't collect from the piece of land you left behind. Or do we say, no, he bought it in a situation where it was okay. Therefore, there is no longer any shibud on the purchaser. He doesn't know anything. At the time that he bought his land, he left the land behind. That's all. This is a question that the Gemara asks. The Gemara says, let's prove it from this case. And in Maseches Gittin, where we saw that a lady had two purchasers who bought land from her husband, The first one we said she can't collect from because she left over land at the time, because he left over land in the property of the husband at the time that he bought his land. The second one she can't collect from because, according to Rabbi Meir, because she wrote over her rights and she said it didn't dvar mainly. So the Gemara is saying that's the same situation as if the land got destroyed. She can't collect that now. So this is exactly like the question we asked. The second piece of land that was left is non-collectible, and you clearly see here that she can't go back to the first purchaser and say, now I want to take yours because I can't collect from what you left behind. Obviously, if at the time that the first purchase was made, there was free land left behind, that purchaser is free and clear, and there's no way to come back to him. So Gemara says it's not a proof, and the Gemara is going to have two approaches to why it's not a proof. The Gemara's first approach is that maybe when we said that she can't collect, it just means she can't collect from the second person. But she really could go and collect from the first person. If she could say that I was just please my husband, was only about when she wrote over her rights to the second buyer, is that serious or not? But that she could go back to the first person because she could say, I lost my rights on the second one, I'm coming back to you. Yeah, definitely she should be able to do that. That's Gemara's first approach. The Gemara says Rava rejects this. Rava says there's two reasons that this is incorrect. First of all, the language of the brisa is she lost her ksuba. That implies that there's no way she's getting that. She lost it from the second guy. She lost it completely. She's not going to get it. And therefore, she can't get it from the first guy either. The second thing is there's a brisa that says clearly she lost it from both. The brisa talks about where it wasn't a ksuba that's trying to be collected. It was a loan that's trying to be repaid. And the lender comes to the borrower and he says, give it to me. He says, I sold them both. I sold my two pieces of it. I sold my two fields. He's meichel the second one, and he can't collect anything. Not from the first one, not from the second one. Not from the first one because he left land free at the time he made his purchase, and not from the second one because he wrote over his rights. So therefore, I clearly see he can't collect from either of them. So therefore says Rava his own shot. Rava says there's no proof because the case where the lady or the guy wrote away their rights, you can't come back to the first guy because they willfully destroyed their own rights. You can't destroy your own rights in the second piece of land and then come back to the first guy and say, oh yeah, I don't have anything anymore. That's because you gave it up. It's your own problem. Don't come to me with complaints afterwards. However, in the case where it got flooded, he didn't do anything wrong. In a case like that, it's hardly possible he could go to the first purchaser and say, hey, I want to take your land now because the second land is no longer viable. The Gemara now tries another approach to resolve this question. The Gemara says simply it's ma'aseh b'chol yom. We see every day, it happens all the time, that there are people who lose their ability to collect from the second available piece of land. They go back to the first purchaser and they say, I want to take away yours, and we allow it. So you see clearly you're allowed to do that. The Gemara shows an example of this ma'aseh b'chol yom. We can't just say ma'aseh b'chol yom. You have to give an example. The Gemara says there was a case where there was a guy who was owed money. He'd lent someone money, and that person had a field. He had a field of grapevines. He had a grape orchard, and he gave the grape orchard to the creditor, and he said, here, you take this field, you take this orchard, and you're going to eat it you'll have it for 10 years, and you'll take the grapes from it for 10 years, and that's going to pay off the loan. And at the end of 10 years, you give it back to me, because all the crops that you got for 10 years will be payment of what I owe you. So that's what they did. Meantime, he had another piece of land. The borrower had another piece of land that he sold to someone else. And what happened was that the orchard dried up after 5 years. After 5 years, only half the debt was repaid. There was nothing left to collect from. So the lender came back to the borrower and said, you owe me, and I'm going to take away the land that you sold. And the person who bought the land said, why do you have a right to come to me? Just because your land got ruined is not my problem. So they went to court, and they went to the Rabbanon, and the psak that was given was that he has a right to take the land away from the person who bought it. So you see clearly, if the free piece of land gets ruined, you have a right to go to the piece of land which was sold. So says this is not a proof either, because here also the guy who bought the land, it's his problem. He should have realized that there's a good chance he's going to lose it, because orchards dry up. Grape orchards dry up and they get ruined, and therefore there's a good possibility you took a risk by buying something which was meshubah to a loan, and it was the only thing ahead of you that you left behind was an orchard that could lose value. Halacha l'maisa, the Gemara says we paskin that if the second field gets ruined, you are able to go to the first field which has already been sold and collect from that. The Gemara now goes into two statements from Abaye in an interesting case. The Gemara is going to ask that they appear to be contradictory, and they also appear to contradict our Mishnah. I'll have to explain that. Before we get to Abaye, let's learn a brisa as an introduction. The case in the brisa is where somebody gives all his property to Reuven, and he says, all my property is given to you, and then after you die, it goes to Shimon. So it goes to you, and then it goes directly to Shimon afterwards. So the question is, what is the status of Ruvain's holding it? So according to Rebbe, Ruvain is only holding the fruits. He only gets to keep it for as far as eating it, because as soon as he's finished with it, it goes to someone else. That means that he really gave it to Shimon, and he let Reuven have it for the meanwhile. So what will happen then if Reuven goes and tries to sell it to Levi? So the only thing he can sell him is the usage. As soon as Reuven dies, Shimon comes and takes it away, because Shimon says I was supposed to get it after Reuven, not Levi. So I can get it. He could take what Reuven had. Reuven had the rights to eat the fruits as long as he's alive. So then Levi could take those rights. He could sell him those rights. But the property itself was never Reuven's. It was supposed to come to me, and therefore I take it away. Now, Rav Shimon ben Gamliel disagrees, and he says it was fully sold to Reuven. And then it was going to be sold afterwards to Shimon. It was supposed to be transferred afterwards to Shimon, but it belonged fully to Reuven. So if Reuven goes and gives it to Levi, sells it to Levi, it goes to Levi, and Levi beats Shimon. Shimon can't come in and take it away from Levi because there's nothing left. That was a later sale. It was supposed to come afterwards. That's halacha of Shimon ben Gamliel. On that, Abaye comments, the halacha is like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that Levi is considered to have bought it from Reuven before Shimon, and therefore he takes precedence. However, if somebody advises Reuven to go sell his property to Levi and rip off Shimon because he's able to get away with that, that person's a rasha, because it's not the right thing to do. The clear desire of the one who gave it is obviously that it should go to Shimon and not change it over here. So now we get to Abaye's first halacha. So Abaye said if somebody writes over all his property to a woman, the Gemara is going to say she's a single unmarried woman, and he tells her, the one who gave it to her tells her, after you're finished with it, it's going to go to Shimon, let's say. Then the lady goes and marries Levi. So now Levi is the same as a buyer. It's the same as our case of Rebbe and Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. And Abaye paskins like Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, that the husband, in this case is Levi, gets to take the property and never goes to Shimon. Just like in the case of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel, the husband is the first buyer. He's the buyer before he's the buyer before Shimon, and therefore Shimon doesn't get anything unless there's something left over from what the husband when he's finished with it. So that is the first statement and halacha of Abaye. Now the second statement is more complex, and the Gemara explains that this is talking about the reason this is not a contradiction. The Gemara asks that it contradicts. And the Gemara explains this is talking about where it's given to a married woman. And here the man gives over the shtar he gives over all his land to a married woman, and then she goes and she sells it to someone else. So now you have three people claiming the land. It's given over the same circumstance. She was supposed to transfer it to Shimon afterwards. She went and she was married at the time to Levi. Then she went and she sold it to Reuven. So now you have Reuven who claims he bought it from the woman. You have Levi who claims he's the woman's husband and therefore he bought it first. And you have Shimon who claims that he was supposed to get it as part of the original gift after the lady was finished with it. So what happens over here? So Abaye's psak is that it goes around in a circle and it ends up in the hand of Reuven, the hand of the one who purchased it. Now, how does this work? So the Gemara says, like Abaye's psak earlier, the husband is the first purchaser. So he comes first and he says, I bought it first, I have first rights. So he takes the land. Then what happens is that the person who was supposed to get it after the wife, that is in this case Shimon, he could come and take it away from Abaye. He could come and take it away from Levi, the husband. Why? Abaye paskin differently in the other case. So the Gemara asks us here. The Gemara answers, since she was married at the time she was given the gift, and the person said to her, I'm giving it to you and then to Shimon, he clearly was excluding Levi, and therefore Levi never has a right to it. He was excluding her husband. And he knew she was married, and he's clearly saying he goes to Shimon after you, and he clearly excluded the husband, and therefore he has no rights. So Shimon can come and take it away from Levi. So Levi gets the first, he's the husband, he says, I'm first buyer. Shimon takes it away from him and says, you were clearly excluded, and therefore I get it. And now along comes Reuven, and he says, hey, I bought it first. And therefore, if Shimon has it, I was the first purchaser because the wife sold it to me, and therefore I get it. And the one who gave it to the wife never excluded me because I wasn't even around at the time. So therefore, I get first rights. I take it away from Shimon. Now, if that's true, though, Now you don't have a reason that the husband can't take it away from Reuven, because the only reason the husband couldn't take it was because the guy who gave the gift to the ladies knew that he was there, and he said, "I wanted to go to Shimon and not to him," but he didn't say I wanted to go to Reuven and not to him. So now the husband says, "I'm the first buyer," because the husband always has it in the first buyer according to Abaye, and therefore I get to take it away. And now the circle goes around and around. Now, so you can see this is going to be the same case as our Mishnah, where the circle went around and around, except here, Abaye Paskins, it ends up in the hands of Reuven, it ends up in the hands of the purchaser. So the Gemara asks the contradiction. In our Mishnah, we said that if it's going around and around, they have to get together and come to an agreement. How come here we don't say that? How come here we say that the Lokeach, the purchaser, is the one who wins? The Gemara explains the reason is because this case is very different than the Mishnah. In the Mishnah, all three people who are arguing about it have equal investment. And therefore, we have no reason to favor one over the other, and they all have to work it out. In this case, the purchaser, he's the one who paid money for it, and he's the one who stands to lose. No one else is going to lose. And therefore, we say that the land ends up by him. The Gemara now concludes the Perek by just asking, what is the last line in the Mishnah? We've seen in the Mishnah that we said the same thing applies by a Balchov and a Isha, that it goes around in a circle. What's the case? So the Gemara says the case is we had two Balei Chov, you had two purchasers. You had a Balchov and two purchasers, or you had a woman and two purchasers. The Rashi explains that the case is as follows. You had Reuven owes money to Shimon, and Reuven has two pieces of land that total the amount that he owes Shimon. He owes Shimon 100 zuz. Each piece of land is worth 50 zuz. He sells them to two purchasers, and then Shimon comes to collect. So he says to the second purchaser, I'm not didn't wrong with you. I'm not going to take anything away from you. Now, he goes to the first purchaser and takes his land away. Now, that purchaser, he has a right to take his land because he can't say, what are you doing taking from me? You should take from the other guy, because he has to take both pieces of land away. So he takes the land from the first purchaser because he has a right to that as much as the other one. Then that first purchaser goes to the second purchaser and takes the land away from him because you bought after me, so I have a right to take it first. Then, once it's in the possession of the first purchaser, Shimon comes back and says, hey, I have a right to that land also because I have a right to 100 zuz worth and I only got 50 from you, and here's another 50. Had it stayed by the second purchaser, he could not have taken because he promised him he's not going to start up with him. Now, however, he is able to take it from the first purchaser. Now that Shimon has all the land, the second purchaser comes back to him and says, hey, I had a right to keep it. You promised me you're not going to take anything away from me, and this comes from me. So therefore, he takes his land worth 50 zuz away from Shimon. Again, the first purchaser comes in and says, well, do you have a right to get land before me? I bought first. And it goes around in a circle, and you came to the same situation. The case of the Baal Chov is the same exact case, except instead of money being owed to Shimon as a loan, it's owed to a woman as a ksuba.